Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Canada's Semiconductor DNA panel. My name's Sherry Colbourne. I am the president and CEO of Spark Center. And you may be able to tell from the background here, I am just wrapping up yet another innovation event in Durham region. Spark Center is one of 17 regional innovation centers across the province of Ontario, and we belong to a very integrative and collaborative ecosystem here in Durham region that supports innovation entrepreneurs. Spark Center is also the lead of the Durham Regional Technology Development Site, which is a provincial initiative focused on next generation automotive called the Ontario Vehicle Innovation Network, funded by the Ontario Centre of Innovation. Lastly, we are one of the charter partners in Eastern Ontario, which is an initiative of collaboration of that unites, I should say, Eastern Ontario's innovation stakeholders to build momentum in Eastern Ontario. So why is all of that important? It is important because this afternoon's panel will address an urgent need to secure a reliable supply chain of semiconductors to feed not only the innovation taking place here in Eastern Ontario, but frankly, across Canada. Our current geopolitical environment lends itself to protectionism, and that, of course, has the potential to disrupt our supply of semiconductors, which are extremely critical to everything that we innovate. Durham region has built its reputation on being a very collaborative innovation ecosystem, which will be evidenced by this afternoon's speakers and the stakeholders that are on this call with me today. But frankly, we will need more than just the cooperation of our local stakeholders here. We will need the stakeholders from across the country to bring this vision to fruition. With that, I would like to turn the mic over to our moderator for this afternoon's panel discussion, Miss Jacqueline Feuiltault from Invest Durham, to kick things off. Over to you, Jacqueline.
Thank you, Sherry. So for any innovative entrepreneurs interested in discussing paths to commercialization, Sherry will be attending the Hard Tech Summit Gala on the evening of November 7th. So thank you everyone for joining us today for our Fireside Chat. As mentioned, I am Jacqueline Feuiltault, Business Development Specialist from Invest Durham, and I will be moderating today's event. For those of you who are curious as to what Invest Durham is, we are the Economic Development and Tourism Division of the Regional Municipality of Durham. Our priority is to lead, facilitate, and support investment attraction and expansion initiatives. We support Durham region's business ecosystem and promote the region as the best place to live, work, and invest. For those of you who are curious about where Durham region is located, we are right along the Ontario-Quebec Innovation Corridor, whose significance in Canada will be elaborated on shortly. Our speakers today are Richard Thurston, Chairman and CEO of Hudson Valley FastFabs, and Jim Bark, Strategic Advisor of DNA Global Ventures. Richard, who goes by Dick, has an impressive career with highlights including General Counsel of Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company from 2002 to 2014, and Assistant General Counsel of Texas Instruments from 1984 to 1996. Jim is a Canadian, now living in the United States, and a strategic advisor to energy and tech companies and to several infrastructure development projects, and was a mergers and acquisition banker for over 20 years in New York City. Prior to his investment banking career, Jim was a corporate lawyer in Toronto. Before we start, I would like to point out that Dick and Jim will be attending Venture Labs Hard Tech Summit on November 6th and 7th, if you would like to meet them in person. If you're interested for a longer in-person discussion, you can email me using the contact information that will be provided following this webinar. So I think it is time to just jump right into it. So Dick, you played a significant role globally in Taiwan, Japan, China, Europe, and the US, even Canada with TSMC Ottawa during key decades of transformation. Could you walk us through how we got here and what the future looks like?
Sure. I think that actually, I'll start by saying that seeing the screen right now, I feel like I'm viewing the premiere showing of Gladiator 2, which in many ways is relevant because we want to avoid, I think, the ongoing conflicts in many ways globally in semiconductors. And in that regard, I believe that Canada has a very, very promising future in playing a much different role than historically has been done by a lot of countries now and in the past in the development of a semiconductor microelectronics ecosystem. And part of it really goes to what Jim and I will talk about today and further explore later, is that Canada has a very exceptional DNA. When you look at the prospects for that sort of development, and Jim and I have kind of come up with a little logo that talks about DNA, but and D standing for a couple of things, but one of which is actually design, another is development, and you could add in a third is diplomacy. When you look at the nodes aspect of it from semiconductors, node is kind of in the middle of our DNA strain, and that relates to both the technical nodes, which are generational in the sense of design, gate characteristics, the manufacturing going from one node to the next one, such as going from 10 nanometer, to 7 to 5 to 3, etc. But also node, in the DNA for Canada, stands for really looking at nodes from a socio-political, cultural point of view of innovation, of continued advancement, and looking at improvement over time. And then the A on one side, would be the alloys aspect of it, which is really the tremendous resources that Canada has from rare earths, critical minerals. And then on the other side is actually its maybe more unique position, even compared to its neighbor in the south, the allies, the networking, global networking that can actually does play and continue to play an important role. So when you look at all that in a historical point of view, as many of you know, and some don't, is that Canada has really been focused on semiconductor ecosystem going back to the 1960s. When you look at original efforts with basically the universities, and the development and some of their early think tank days going on. And then as you look at from spanning the 60s through what I would say is the 90s, a lot was going on. We don't have anywhere near the time to talk about that, but what is included in that universe? Well, we have Nortel, the good and the bad, but there's a lot of good, a lot of lessons learned to be there that are applicable today. So during this period of growth and infrastructure development, of course, we have one of the great success stories, which is also ATI. And then as it was bought by AMD, a couple of decades later, I first became aware of it, not really through IBM, which was a competitor of TI, but through a tremendous asset and gem that Canada has had, which is in its design labs that were used initially for reverse engineering and helping companies like TI and TSMC, in reverse engineering, looking at its competition. And so that all started in the late 80s with Semiconductor Insights. And then it became Tech Insights, and then also bought Chipworks. So those three companies were all founded in Canada. I think all of them were Ottawa, based, and tremendous engineering resource that came out of the, engineering schools of Canada's universities. So you look at that foundation, which continues to exist, and a lot of people have thought of them as kind of decapping, infringement analysis, much more than that, which can be tapped into. In fact, one of the more recent, the most recent, when you look at export control and technology that came to the attention of the public, in some ways unfortunate, was that Tech Insights was the one that did the analysis, actually TSMC, for TSMC, with respect to the chip that somehow appeared in Huawei's, cell phone. So a very, very important infrastructure, which it really overlies, so much that's going on. Of course, we have the traditional mainstay in Canada and Bromont of IBM and Advanced Packaging Group, and then over time, that's morphed. You mentioned, Jacqueline, my involvement, and actually was part of the team, and it was more strategy than it was legal, that came upon and got Chairman C.C. Way, today's Chairman TSMC, to help establish the design center that Cormac O'Connell ably runs today in Canada, one of the best in the world, in my opinion, design centers. So we've seen that, and now, of course, it's been growing beyond those type of things, and you have great mainstay in partner of ours, and certainly will be being actively involved at Hardtech with Venture Lab. We have, of course, C2MI, and now you're seeing the photonics and optronics, everything in Canada's DNA that is going to provide a tremendous base, already does, for future growth in this ecosystem and supply chain. So I'll stop there for now.
Oh, that's some really fantastic insight just right from the get-go. Jim, your background in finance is noteworthy. North America has invested heavily in software. However, hardware has been much harder to sell to investors. What's the opportunity that you see here?
You're muted, Jim.
Jim, you're muted.
Sorry. I can talk about North America, but why don't I start with Canada? The issue with semiconductors is that it is probably the one sector that is the most strategic and requires almost a government to lead the way. There's no country in the world that does semiconductors where the government didn't actually initiate the sector, invest in the sector, and create it. And if Canada wants to get into semiconductors, our governments are going to have to take the lead. The opportunity for Canada, though, is that as the US is trying to pull back semiconductors today from Asia, it's almost taking it too far back, and it's trying to do the entire supply chain on its own. And that's the other thing about semiconductors. No country owns semiconductors from the beginning of the supply chain to the end. And when you try to do the whole thing yourself, you're bound to fail. If you go back a little while, there was a country that was the second largest economy in the world. It was Asian. It was just on the verge of becoming America's biggest competitor and probably surpassing the US. It was the leading producer of semiconductors, had a huge balance of trade over the US, and a economic crisis caused it to lose some of its momentum. A real estate crisis caused it to start struggling, and eventually it no longer held quite as much momentum going to the future. And of course, that's Japan. Today, China is going through the same cycle, but to accelerate its issues, the US has decided that it'll pull back all semiconductor manufacturing back to the US. And that's great in terms of helping the US gain more strength in manufacturing. The issue, though, is no country can do it on its own. And the US becoming isolationist makes it very hard. Canada can actually help the US by becoming a partner. We're the friendly partner that allows other countries to view North America as a bloc rather than the US as this giant entity that is hard to crack into. This is the economic opportunity for Canada. Dick, you want to jump in?
Well, I think, your point on Japan, or using that as an example, Jim, is really right on. I lived in Japan for a number of years, fought the first semiconductor wars, which were really quite significant. And what happened in Japan is, I think, a lesson to be learned for Canada is that Japan's strengths originated with industrial policy. So did Korea's, Taiwan's, China's, especially Singapore's. And it was their tremendous focus on the key elements of industrial policy and their execution on that that led to their success. What happened, in part related to what you said, is that they lost that focus. They lost that particular drive at the government level. And I believe, that in order for really Canada to succeed in these efforts, there has to be a large, much more, focused industrial policy. There's a number of points there we can talk about that later that I think need to be put in place. And in fact, what is and will continue to, I think, become a shortcoming of the U.S. is the lack of a real industrial policy. It's kind of haphazard, in the CHIPS Act, but doesn't go to the level that I think can be done, and Canada's DNA does allow. So I think, as we look going forward, you're absolutely correct. Government investment, must be there. It must take the lead. I think that investment needs to be different than what the U.S. thinks its model is doing. And it all comes down to initially the support in infrastructure, right? I've been involved in my career I figured it out before this phone call, working with approximately 20 different governments, to help them create technology policy, technology parks, and ranging from, state to mostly global, predominantly all the Asian, giants in this regard. But, the key element always has been the ability to pull together the resources to create a good semiconductor industrial base that focuses on, technology, park infrastructure, which is a whole gamut of infrastructure. And we certainly can talk a lot more about that. But I think that's what Jacqueline's trying to do, and others, that are sponsoring this initiative is exactly that point. And I think there's the fundamental role that has to be coordinated at the local level, the regional level, the provincial, and federal, level in Canada, and can be perhaps better done than certainly any place in North America. I'll stop there.
No, thank you. No, thank you, Dick. And I think this kind of raises a really interesting discussion around Canada's economic imperative. As you mentioned, semiconductors are foundational to every industry, arguably being called the oil of the 21st century. This alone should be enough to acknowledge Canada's need for an economic imperative, with the core of it being in the Ontario-Quebec corridor. Ontario's automotive sector is a great example. But during COVID, we had a production loss of 37%, which was directly impacted by supply chain disruptions with chip production. So maybe we can talk about these opportunities specifically in the automotive sector, which are clearly applicable in many other sectors. But since it's so strong in Ontario, I think this is a really great place to start.
I couldn't agree more from my visits over the years. But I do want to emphasize, and please don't take offense to this, but it's also extremely critical that other provinces, especially, Quebec, its neighboring, that has a lot of tremendous resources, also participate in that. I think what you're doing and what others are doing is tremendous, and it lays a great, foundation, for, moving forward. What the federal government has been doing also is great. I mean, I met Jim through a tremendous, staff in the New York consulate. The Canadian consulates throughout the U.S. are tremendous. I think New York, of course, on prejudice, is the best in class. But that promotional aspect of it is extremely critical. And if you take the automotive, which I think is a correct place to, begin in a significant initiative, there is, and that's what I've been doing in the last few years, is focusing on semiconductor devices that go into automotive. And, one last point, I believe very much in the advanced technology, was very much involved with TSMC and getting to where it is today as the world's best in class when it comes to almost anything semiconductor. But we don't have to start there. I think that the right place to start in Canada is at a 200 millimeter, fab. And that's what we've been, I think, discussing a lot of, and we'll continue to discuss. because that can build create the building blocks to the various things that we would do, including workforce development. In positioning Canada, it's not today for AI. That's going to be important, but I think it's positioning Canada when you look at everything that's going on with quantum, with photonics, you name it. It's for AGI. And Canada could be the leader, and you start with the right manufacturing base and then build upon it. That's where I think the industrial policy should focus in semiconductors, and automotive is a critical element of that with all the suppliers that you have in Canada.
Yeah, and I love, Jacqueline, that you described it as foundational. That's an important word. In my view, there's not that many sectors that are foundational. I can really only think of two. One is food, one is energy, because without either, we're just not here anymore. But going forward, I think there is a third foundational sector, and that's semiconductors, because it's going to be embedded in everything. Every other sector, including automotive, is derivative of the three. And
Right.
so depending on the whims and the changes in the mood of society, a sector that might be hot today could disappear tomorrow, unless you're one of the three foundational sectors. We're always going to need food, we're always going to need energy, and we will, going forward, always need semiconductors. So from a government industrial policy, economic policy standpoint, if you're going to pick any sector to invest in, I would pick either energy or semiconductors. But that's my bias.
Yeah.
I absolutely love the lens that we're kind of covering about semiconductors, because I do feel like the semiconductor and hard tech world kind of tends to fall on the side of, electrical engineering, computers, AI, ICT. But really, because it's foundational, it is really as important as manufacturing. And I think we really need to be discussing it in that lens, especially when getting senior government eyes on it. So, and we've been through this run several times before. Dick, you touched up on it in your introduction, and I really want to kind of pull that thread on the diplomacy and nodes allies aspect of DNA. So, I would love for you to elaborate more on kind of Canada's DNA in the past, and some of those what we can learn from that as well to make these opportunities successful moving forward.
Well, I think when you look at the Canadian experiences, that's one where you have had a tremendous amount of innovation, which started very much locally in, as I said, going all the way back to the 1960s and 1980s. What's really helped today, when you look at the global aspect of it, is really kind of the open immigration policy, that have, you walk in Toronto, right? And I've walked there, or you especially go to Niagara Falls, which of course is touristy, but tremendous diversity of talent. And that talent is, covers what we were just talking about. And, sons and daughters and many different people, that's in this whole ecosystem, and the universities that run across all of Canada. Of course, you look at the local universities, from Sherbrooke going to University of Toronto and everything else. That diversity and that young creativity is what I see already as driving it. So key for that is we have to ensure their future by having the jobs that will enable them to sustain the cost of living. And that then comes in manufacturing and industrial policy. And the semiconductors is beautiful because it plays to different interests. Interest in people that want to sit in an office and sit at a computer desk, or actually be on the manufacturing floor. And the reason why I like 200 millimeter and specialty product is that we can get a lot more people on the manufacturing floor in the infrastructure, rather than, don't get me wrong, extremely important advanced manufacturing, but that's 100% automated. It's being run by control rooms and things of that nature. That's all good, but let's get people trained. For example, a critical element of industrial policy in the Asian countries, and part of what is, I call workforce development, everybody does, STEM, the STEM emphasis in the public schools, and the private schools, of course, too. But the public schools going to high school, we've created here in Hudson River Valley a mechatronics laboratory that teaches HVAC, plumbing, and everything for use in semiconductors. So, that sort of talent pool then builds upon and gets the interest in everything, else. So I think that, we had that tremendous diversity of talent, throughout Canada, that can, bring in from all, borders, right? North, south, east, and west, the peoples that I think, the government policy and industrial policy needs to focus first and foremost on that, on taking these universities. Then we have the startups, we have the spin outs, tremendous, aspects of going on in photonics and quantum as just some examples, right? So I think that's where, we can build, and then we go to the rest of industrial policy, which ultimately you're talking about isolationism. What really has to be a core element of industrial policy, Japan, Korea, everybody is export orientation, right? Building the products that other countries want to have, including China.
Exactly. When you ask about the economic impact and so on, I just think about reshoring and how everyone's been talking about reshoring. But as you know, in Durham region, reshoring is already happening, and it's only accelerating. But we're not reshoring the manufacturing of plastic toys in North America. We're not going to do those jobs. We're reshoring advanced manufacturing. We're doing the higher value added jobs that actually pay big salaries. This is exactly what we should be getting into. And everything we can do to support that, it's a good investment for the governments, and it's a great investment for the people. The most important type of advanced manufacturing, again, is semiconductors. And that's why, even though I'm not a semiconductor guy, I'm a finance guy, I'm focused on semis. And meeting people like Dick, I realize how valuable it is, and how once we had a leadership in semis back in the 60s, 70s, even the 80s. Right. And in a way, we gave it up. When we gave up ATI to AMD back in the 2000s, we didn't just give up a little chip design company. We gave up the company that allowed AMD to go from a creator of CPUs to the number 2 GPU company in the world, and therefore it's going to be the number 2 chip maker for AI going forward. How great would that be if that was a Canadian company today?
And look further, right? In some the success stories that have continued to be in a different sense. You take what I really emphasize a lot, and is on this whole design aspect and intellectual property creation. One of the best implementers, innovators in intellectual property going back to that point in time was a company called Mossade. It now exists again because it's been renamed, but what had happened because of the lack of a proper, in my opinion, right, lack of a proper supportive industrial policy in this area, Mossade ended up having to go to be a licensing house. Tremendous intellectual property that it created, tremendous patent portfolio when you're looking at the DRAM, as I recall, because I dealt with them, when I was in Taiwan, actually with TI and so forth. And their design capabilities in the ecosystem, which is, again, I really emphasize this. And, it's Mossade, it's Wyland, it's a number of those companies that are still innovating. And that talent, is there in Canada, and we can tap upon that. And you look at, the tremendous number of photonic startups, for example, are going to be a huge, player out in the future. Maybe not, the market's not there right now. I look at it as probably like the old days. RCA, did a lot of their work near where I live. The laser disc. I don't know how many remember laser disc. Well, it didn't go very far. Certainly the next few generations did and were huge, but we lost that prowess. RCA no longer, U.S. made in Camden, New Jersey, with the Victor phonographs. So we have to avoid that. So what we develop as far as the industrial policy cornerstones has to be done with lasting, competitiveness in mind. And one other thing I'll touch upon now, which is a favorite, is that our industry, semiconductor, has been through too many cycles. I look at it as 8 major ones in my career. There's probably altogether 20. Those will not disappear, no matter what the chip policies are around the world. What we have to be able to do is plan our competitiveness, our building of the right products, so that we can sustain that. So, when the next cycle comes down, we don't have to be laying off a lot of our sons and daughters and grandchildren that spent all these years and all these loans, for college, to learn about, computer aided design and so forth.
And there's something really unique about Southern Ontario that makes it perfect for semiconductors. There are a few things that you absolutely have to have if you're going to become a semiconductor hub. One of them is just fresh water. And Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, these are some big lakes that have a lot of fresh water. There's not many places in North America that have access to fresh water like we do. Exactly. It's a little dry these days. And then the other thing that you need is absolute power certainty, absolute guaranteed power, which is what nuclear provides. And Ontario is the jurisdiction that has the most nuclear energy capacity in North America, and it's 2/3 of our power generation. It's perfect for semis. And then as you add the multicultural aspect of Southern Ontario that Dick mentioned, the fact that Toronto is a banking center and therefore has the capital to invest in all these kind of projects, and a bunch of other reasons, including visas and so on. There's almost nowhere else that has these advantages like Southern Ontario does. We should be going out and marketing it like crazy. As a Canadian living in New York, my friends in New York City never mention Toronto unless I bring it up. And when I start telling them about the things that I just discussed, they go, wow, we didn't know. We didn't even know it was sitting on a lake. I think Canadians need to do a better job of marketing your advantages.
But that still comes back to government leadership, right? It comes back to industrial policy, and this is all part of what are one of I consider to be the 10 critical elements of an industrial policy in our space at semiconductors. So, and don't forget, as I started off, the critical minerals, right? The rare earths, which are going to be even more vital going forward in the next generations as we go to AGI generation.
Well, they say, I guess Mark Twain once said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. So it sounds like we need to take an initiative both on the public and private sector level to make sure that we're not creating this very sad poem. And an interesting fact about job creation in semiconductor industry. So for every one job created by semiconductor fabrication, it creates 7 jobs. Highly skilled jobs in the ecosystem, which is a really important thing to note. So maybe not in the short term does it seem like it's a significant benefit, but it's also a multi-trillion-dollar industry. So, there's so much for potential for it. And then finally, with Durham region being the clean energy capital of Canada, it's not just the nuclear power generation that we're doing to to support Ontario's electricity needs, but there's a lot of energy innovation and clean energy innovation. So it really creates even more opportunities, even in the energy generation space, as we explore green hydrogen, or other alternative methods, to even be self-sustaining for even just the manufacturing sector. So from a grid connectivity standpoint, we also provide that skill and that expertise in, that type of innovation, which is going to be really important because our needs for energy are not going to decrease. They're going to balloon. And, we need everything in this ecosystem to thrive as a society. So, you two bring an international perspective to Canada, where, it might flourish in a globally realigning sector. Is there a critical idea you want to leave the audience with to reflect on?
Vic, if you want to have the last word, I can jump in with a little one. The one thing I'd like my fellow Canadians to realize is that we need to invest, and we need to invest large numbers. And we need to get over the idea that billions are a big number, because now we're talking about trillions, as you just mentioned. The benefit of the semiconductor sector is that there's $1 trillion of potential economic performance coming towards whoever becomes leaders in that. One way of looking at the problem, the units problem that a lot of people have, is that they think millions is a big number, and then billions is a big number, and trillions are a big number. But sometimes they don't really have a sense of how big each of these numbers are. So if I could give a little example, if you take a stack of $100 bills, US $100 bills, if it gets to about 4 feet high, that's $1 million. If you stack up $100 bills and fill up a closet, that's about $1 billion. $1 trillion is a building, a large skyscraper. Would you rather have an opportunity that pays you billions, or would you rather have the skyscraper full of hundreds? Go ahead, Dick.
Yeah, well, I go back to, Jacqueline, what you had said before, the public-private partnership. When you look at what the success stories have been around the world, and there have been many, and most of them have gone through their cycles. But you look at the East Asia, you even look at, Brazil, you look at Germany, you look at other countries. Well, it's been that public-private partnership where you have, in a sense, some very strong visionary government leaders that were not afraid to take risks, that they were prepared to invest in the future. And in the future, if I take Taiwan, I had was very fortunate to be there kind of at the dawn of creation when, you recall, made in Taiwan was laughed at, right? And it's not laughed at anymore. Well, it really started with, individuals, and particularly two individuals, in one who both I had the fortune to meet and to deal with, but one was in the 70s. His name was Sun, S-U-N, Yun Swan. And he was really among titles he had was Minister of Economic Affairs and, several others, but he was really the father of industrialization. And I had the fortune, I was there in Taiwan in 75, 76 under Rotary, fellowship, and participated in the principal Rotary Club at the time. And as a result of that and the connections, I got to meet him, I got to meet others. And I was taken as a graduate student out to a little sleepy village that was growing bamboo prolifically called Hsinchu. Nobody knew where Hsinchu was, even in Taiwan, because the highways, the 10 great industrial projects that Dr. Sun created were not yet real. They were just starting. But he had someone take me there. He said, this is where we're going to start the modernization of Taiwan. A sleepy little village full of rice paddies and hills, and had become the model of how to do the technology park correct. Following on his heels was another person, a very famous, probably known as the godfather of technology. That was K.T. Lee, who is a minister without portfolio. What was the most brilliant thing he ever did? He brought Morris Chang to Taiwan to head up ITRI, which was founded actually by Dr. Sun earlier, 10 years earlier. And so, but K.T. Lee did many other things great too. I think we need to have in Canada, that sort of visionary, but also knows how to bring public, partnership together, private industry. They were successful because of the way they created policy incentives, everything to bring companies to Taiwan, like an RCA, like Texas Instruments, et cetera. And so I think that public-private partnership is a must. And it can't be done by committees. It can't be done by semiconductor councils and this and that, right? it has to be done by action.
If I could amend my previous answer about what we should leave everything off with, I want to change it to Dick Thurston was in the room for every important event with semiconductors. Chip Miller wrote a great, Chris Miller wrote a great book, Chip Wars, where he describes the rooms and what happened. But he's talking to people who knew someone who might have been in the room. Dick was actually in there.
I think that's a really important thing for everyone to know and a fantastic closing thought. And I'm so excited as a Canadian, just with how much potential we have, especially as allies, I think, to the rest of the world. Like, I mean, this is not just a Canadian thing, this is a global thing. And you're absolutely right, to achieve a big vision like this. I mean, any large vision is daunting, but you just got to take it one step at a time, and you have to really connect the nodes. And make those connections and bring everyone together and work together towards this. So incredible insight. And we already have a large number of questions that were sent to us beforehand. So we'd love to use a little bit of extra time to really expand the Q&A period. So I will start with some of the questions that were sent to us first, and then I will move on to the Q&A in the chat. So first question is, how can a small business get involved in the semiconductor supply value chain, a relatively low capital endeavor to get your foot in the door?
You want to start, Dick, or me?
Yeah, go ahead, you, then I'll add on.
Great. Well, if you're a relatively new or young startup trying to get into semis, I wouldn't be trying to do the 5 nanometer advanced semiconductors. It's too hard a slog, too big an investment. But if you try to do the more mature semiconductors like Dick is doing, Dick and I are doing with DNA, that is a sector that still has a lot of costs and a lot of investment, but is not as big an investment as the advanced stuff. Why don't you go from there, Dick?
I think it certainly depends on the area that you're interested, but let's take one that I've advised countless companies over the decades, and that's early stage startup. It starts with an idea. Don't be afraid then to develop your idea, capture it, maybe with patent prosecution, but also protect your trade secrets. And there is still some good venture capital money out there. I think that one of the things that Canada needs to create is a fund of funds, right? That does things differently and doesn't dole out the billion. Well, it hasn't. It's stated it's going to give billions, but it still hasn't handed out a lot of money in the U.S. But make sure that as you look at networking, there are plenty of fine organizations in Canada that exist, and whether or not it's government sponsored, business sponsored. There is, the Semiconductor Industry Council, among other things. Laura Williams has been doing this CHIPS month, all sorts of stuff, right? All sorts of groups. And I think that probably Jacqueline and all of us can help with identifying how you can network. But the universities have programs. There's a lot of free lectures. There's a lot of stuff on the internet. Great groups like Semi has all sorts of programs on how a startup company can get started. And of course, I'm happy to answer question, or if you want to do it. But if you have a great idea, then start capturing it. Write it down, protect it, and then take it to someone. And there are numerous, whether it's Montreal, it's Toronto, it's Markham, great organizations. I've mentioned some like a Venture Lab, that can certainly help you, right? And Jacqueline can help you. I know that.
Thank you. Yeah, and any of the regional innovation centers across Ontario also collaborate, so they can also point you to the right one that's best suited to help you, such as Spark Center. So
great.
Use these resources. Absolutely.
Like, I'm glad you mentioned. I forgot. But like with Spark, I have a few good friends that are also on their advisory board, so from industry, right? So they have this network. It's a tremendous network that I think you can take advantage of without spending a lot of money. Maybe time, but not money.
Right.
So next question, given that most fabs are being built in our allied countries to ensure capacity, will a fab here in Canada entice international companies to use our fab?
I believe yes. I believe it's not to be a 5 nanometer fab. As I said, mature node 200 millimeter, because I don't like the word mature node. I like the word essential node. And the products that are produced out of those sort of fabs, which still make a good amount of profit, are essential to AI and the future of AGI. Such as what we're doing is sensors and TPMS, data collection sensors. Just as one of many things, but all the other stuff. So I think yes, but I think that before those companies were to come, I think we have to get the act together on this industrial policy thing, because that also involves, subsidies, monies, and not everything's for free. It involves law reform, right? It involves tax, issues. So when you look at what Japan, Taiwan, Singapore did as an example, it was all those areas. As I said, I have 10 points, 10 key points, for what should go into that to attract that sort of investment. But what's going to be the most important? Talent.
Okay. I'm going to skip a couple just to be cognizant of time. So if we do have some time yet left, we will revisit them. I am going to just pivot very quickly because I do see some awesome questions coming into the chat. And some of them are related. So governments are typically slow to come to the table. What can private companies do today to move this forward so that Canada is not left behind?
Well, now, Jim, you're Canadian. I'll let you do that.
I would, before you even start your startup, I would just start meeting people like you, Jacqueline, people in government at all levels. And you can start regionally, because regional people tend to be a little bit more friendly and accessible. So you've been such a help to us. And I think everyone else should try to do it the same way. The other thing is governments are desperate for ideas, and good ideas that actually have a good return. And the great thing about semiconductors is that they generally have decent returns if you can do it properly. So go in and explain what the benefits are of the project you're thinking about. And people will listen, especially when it comes to semiconductors.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think it's networking, through the various business associations. Most of them will have a committee, chambers of commerce type of things. Even, believe it or not, one of the it really made a huge impact on my career and continues to, but it was a great access to service organizations. I'm a member and now president-elect of our Rotary Club. There are a lot of people that participate in those groups, in similar situations, small businessmen, but also, government leaders and academia. So I think it's about networking. That's how you really start to figure out, get some advice from, what particular area you're interested in and what is the building blocks that are needed to do that. And some things you don't want to start with, probably. But I find today, despite all the political uncertainty, there still is a lot of interest, because that ultimately it creates jobs, right? And it creates, as Jim said earlier, well-paying jobs, and so nobody can really ignore that, too long.
We have one. I think this one's a really excellent one to kind of put things into perspective. Considering the time it takes to bring up a fab to production, need to invest in people, and the rapid commoditization of technology nodes, what are your views on the profitability of a new 200 millimeter fab? Is there any particular area that can offer a promise of ROI and beyond? What should be the commitment to the next step?
Yeah. Well, let me tackle that, because I've been addressing that. We have a model. We're seeking funding right now, for phase 1 down here, and looking, actually have rights to some facilities, including an existing 70,000 square foot clean room that's vacant. Based on that, buying the tools, we can be up and running once we get the investment in place. within 12 to 18 months. And within that first year of operation, we'll be turning a revenue of 345 million and fully loaded on 2 shifts. And we're talking about 70,000 to 100,000 square feet. That can be done in Canada, no question about it. The core issues, of course, is workforce development and how to get the folks there in Canada, both trained but come from the United States, most likely. But there's also foreign talent pools. But another aspect of it is really figuring out what you're going to focus on, and then it's a matter of acquiring the tools, the manufacturing equipment. That's going to take some time, and getting the installation. But there's a lot of ways to do that. I'm not going to share our trade secrets on that. I can consult with someone that wants to. But no, I think that if there was the decision from an industrial policy point of view, Jacqueline has the land, we have the energy, we have the water, we can find the tools, we could be up and running with something after building the building or converting it, probably within 2 to 3 years.
That's some really exciting stuff, and I hope some people who are not necessarily in the semiconductor industry were lighting up with all the opportunities that could be laid out for them. How important is it for there to be a centralized and/or unified voice speaking to government on behalf of the semiconductor industry in Canada, especially when it comes to raising awareness and eventually necessary funding to build a semi-fab on home soil?
Well, I think the more unified the voice, the better it's going to be, in the sense that it gets back to what Jim was talking about too. It's showing that there is a public interest for a meaningful long-term competitiveness of Canada, and that can be created independent of the friends down south, right? I think the biggest issue that I see is that it has to be, again, this public-private partnership that is no longer risk adverse, right? We've had different, organizations, some great ones, there's some that are still there, and you look at the capabilities, but it has to be one that has the ability to come up with today proposals to the government that don't take another 12 months, 2 years to sit in committee and make proposals. Everything that is needed for the government to act is there today, and quite honestly, and it's low-hanging fruit. And you take, whether it's Spark, it's Venture Labs, Jacqueline, it's all that you're doing and others are doing. You look at the great universities, it's there. There has to be a catalyst, and who or what is that catalyst going to be? I think that's the key question.
Yeah.
Personally, I've never found it, 40 years of experience, quite honestly, never coming from a chambers of commerce or a trade association. There's too many vested conflicting interests. It has to come from the private sector, in the sense of companies that have a vested interest, universities that have a vested interest in this, coming together, to get their representatives at the provincial and the federal level, to really say, oh, this is important because it's important to you.
Yeah, and beyond a single voice for the industry, the governments themselves have to have a single vision. We can't have a policy that changes every 4 or 5 years when the next government comes in, because these plants take about that long to get built, and by the time we're up and running, we have a new government that comes in and says we're going to do something totally different. We can't do that if we want to actually become a player in semiconductors.
This one's actually kind of a fun and interesting one, because we've been speaking kind of heavily on the policy side. What kind of engineering support is needed to support you in all these project phases?
Well, it is really a critical question, and so it just takes more time. We have, ourselves, in what I've been doing just here, already a significant level, page after page of what you need to have. But I think the engineering support is going to be determined in part by the technologies that are going to be utilized to be manufacturing product, right? But you have to have the fundamentals, starting with technicians that know how to do HVAC systems, water, purified water, gas, build those lines, build that supply going in, basic construction, for a clean room, which doesn't have to be one that has all the waffle floors and so forth to start off with, especially at 200 millimeter. You need then to have the engineers that do the design work, for the mechanical, and we have different ways that can approach it. It's software engineers, it's hardware engineers, it's looking at, do we want to create a new hardware-based system? I've been involved for decades in various open source initiatives, right? A big one today that's being discussed is open source hardware. Well, what does that mean for the engineering base? And last but not least, it's what are the products that are going to be consumed by Canadians and others? What is it that the consumer wants to have? Because truly, in order for this to succeed, in designing a plant, designing the business system, you can't go the route of a contract manufacturer that has no commitment, right? For this facility, the first one, it has to have the strongest support so that 100% of the output is pre-committed, quite honestly, and that's then where you get the banks, where you get the insurance companies, where you get everybody to come in, and the government doesn't have to do it all itself. It has to be the catalyst. And that's why I say there really needs to be created a fund of funds, for this sort of thing. And, I believe that my dear friends in the Consulate of New York, we had a discussion way back over a year or 2 years ago with Consul General, with Chris Wimmer, with David Bryce, and some others on that point, right? And it's getting that message up, to the central government as well.
So we actually got more questions in.
Can I answer? Oh,
so I think there are people who do have to check out. So before everyone leaves, I'm happy to stay for more Q&A, but I just wanted to thank everyone who's attended. I hope that you really got something out of this, and you have more questions and you can reach out to us. I just wanted to quickly mention, as the beginning of this webinar, Dick and Jim will be attending Venture Labs Hard Tech Summit on November 6th and 7th. If you would like to meet them in person, and if you would like a longer in-person discussion, there will be an email sent out with my contact information, and I'll be happy to help make those arrangements, make those arrangements. And also, we can continue this conversation following this webinar. We really appreciate all of the interest and questions and curiosity and interest in partnerships. So, please reach out. And if any of these questions were missed, I apologize. I was trying to make sure we cover all of the content relevant. And if some of them were related, I tried to clump them together. But we're happy to discuss that further if there was anything you missed. And there will be a recording.
And I'd like to add one thing, Jacqueline. First, thank you, right, for this. I want to really thank, Sherry Colbourne, for, when Spark, right, for sponsoring this. Laura Williams has been great, with doing this. We had, great support too by Chantel, and of course, Jim's been tremendous as always. So I really just want to get those people recognized for putting this program together and all that's been done in the outreach. So they've been great supporters.
I second that too. Everyone's been wonderful. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, Laura Williams, this wouldn't have happened without you, the organizer of Chips Month. So, I'm forever grateful. I've horrified of having this much exposure, but I know it's for the greater good, the economy. And, Spark Center, what an incredible partner. So, I think these are the types of events we really need to promote innovation within Canada. We have so much potential. And I think a lot of it comes down to, there's all these services out here and they're available, and we want to help entrepreneurs and we want to help businesses and we want to help great ideas thrive in Canada and really put ourselves on the map. So, Spark Center, I cannot thank you enough. Sherry is always amazing at articulating just how great our ecosystem is. So, I mean, I will conclude with that with anyone who does need to log off, but I did see this wonderful question about packaging, and I know there's a lot of people here with that background. So I wanted to make sure that gets addressed. So the question is, how about packaging? Should packaging be the near front end and in-house?
Well, I mean, absolutely. And I think that unlike almost any other place in North America, Canada is tremendously benefited by Stefan and his group at IBM in Bromont. I can't say enough. Of course, what got me started really with Canada in many ways, beyond what I said, is back in 2012, 2013, TSMC, I was responsible for trying to buy IBM microelectronics. And let me tell you, one of the gems that still exists is that operation up there with packaging. And I think can be a key foundational cornerstone, along with everything else. You have Teledyne, C2MI. I don't want to, but since the question's on packaging, and then we have such tremendously talented people at McGill University and the others that already know this area. You look at advanced packaging, but more importantly, where we need to focus is on the advanced packaging that deals with additive materials, flexible materials, because that's where the future is, including we're doing a system on the chip that's flexible that will go into a tire. So I encourage students, and certainly I encourage students to go to McGill and enroll in their courses, right? Along with the others. I don't want to de-emphasize the rest of the university structures, but it's a gem in the rough that people don't know about. IBM isn't, but a lot of people don't know about it. And I think, they'd love to have more business coming their way.
Agreed.
And the final one, and I think it's a burning question amongst us government types and economic developers. What supply chain players from Asia, like Japan, should we be attracting into Ontario to supply Micron and others?
Well, I mean, part of it is depending on where we focus on the technology development, and if you look at what Japan continues to dominate in, specialized tools, equipment manufactured, specialized chemicals, wafer, pulling and a variety of things, and it's well known, and we could always talk more about, those sort of infrastructures. And I think that there is strong interest in certain Japanese companies to do that and do have a presence. So that's something that we can discuss going forward. But I think it gets back to our DNA and the allies and diplomacy, right? The Canadian government, I've been impressed by its outreach when it comes to its foreign trade activities and missions abroad. And as I said, I talk, really great pride knowing the folks in the consulate here. But the missions that go offshore are great sources of information, right, for you, and also to take the message across. I was fortunate to be involved in that. The de facto Taiwan ambassadors and that whole function a month or two ago in Toronto, and there was a great example, well attended, and you're talking about even Taiwan suppliers that were there. So a lot of opportunities. I think, though, the industrial policy has to come together probably before we hit that.
Exactly. It's the old field of dreams. If you build it, they'll come. Once we have a semiconductor hub, all these suppliers will naturally gravitate towards it. One of the main reasons is that Canada has a great visa program compared to the US, where you can't get a visa for anyone. And if you're going to build a large company in the US, you have to bring over people, and we can't do that here. Whereas in Canada, you could probably have a visa in a week, from what I'm told. And so if you can do that, there's a lot of companies that would love to be in North America, don't necessarily have to be in America. They can be in Canada to supply all of North America.
Yeah.
And these are large companies. Their factories are in the hundreds of millions, if not billions, and they will just naturally come to wherever we build a semiconductor hub.
Right.
Well, I guess in that case, universities and senior government and immigrations, buckle up. So I will leave it on that note. It's always such a pleasure talking with you guys, and I am super looking forward to seeing you next week and hopefully seeing some of the people on this chat at the Hard Tech Summit.
Very good.
Thank you, Jacqueline.
Have a great day, everyone.
Great job.
Bye.
Bye-bye.